Yeah, I don't know how to do it, so I don't want to touch it.
She doesn't have it there.
Okay, we're good. We're good. Good. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, before the council meeting, we have a council informational put on by Host Compliance dealing with the short-term rental licensing, management, and enforcement issue. And just for members of council, if you wish to ask questions after the presentation, please speak directly into your mic, or it may not pick up for the gentleman to hear you. Okay? Shall we begin, please?
Sure. Deanna Rhodes here, city planner. Just wanted to introduce you to Bruce McCaskill. He's with Granicus, which is Host Compliance, is their software. The mayor has asked us to do some research into short-term rentals, how they're handled in other communities. We reached out to the Council of Governments probably within the last year. They did a white paper on it and suggested that each community do their own ordinance on it. If you're going to do enforcement and regulate them, some communities in Connecticut have decided not to do that. So we have been discussing it and thought we would look into it further. We got contacted by Granicus, kind of cold call, and asked us, I guess they were seeing that there's an uptick. They were seeing an uptick in short-term rentals in our community and asked if, how we're handling it. And are doing a complimentary presentation.
I'm sorry, could you go to the mic and
Sure.
begin again?
Sure, start from the beginning?
Public record, please.
Okay, for the public record, hi, I'm Deanna Rhodes, Director of Planning for the City of Norwich. And tonight we have a company named Granicus here and Bruce McCaskill, who is going to do a presentation about Host Compliance, which is a software that manages short-term rental compliance and regulating in communities for enforcement. It also starts with licensing. They work with the licensing component as well. The mayor had asked us to look into this because we have quite a bit of short-term rentals in our community, but we didn't have a good grasp of how many we had. We worked with the COG, the Council of Governments here about a year ago in all the region, asked about how we were going to handle short-term rentals in the region, and they came up with a white paper that recommended that each community set their own ordinance if they decided to so choose to enforce and regulate anything regarding short-term rentals. So Host Compliance reached out to the community. They searched the internet on a regular basis and find rentals and realized we had quite a few and wanted to know what we were doing about them. And so they did a presentation for us, which we thought was really valuable, and they're here tonight to do the presentation for the council. I hope this leads to further discussion about whether the council wants the city to create an ordinance to regulate short-term rentals in the community, or if they want to take a hands-off approach, which is done in several communities in Connecticut that have looked at this issue. So we're really looking for your direction, but we think if you want to do some kind of licensing and regulating of these, that we will need, we feel, we don't have the capacity in-house to do this, and so this would be a type of a program and company that we would like to work with potentially. So I'm going to let them, Bruce McCaskill, do his presentation, and I'll be here for questions and answers, and so will Bruce and Rick Shook, the zoning officers here, and Dan Deniska, the assistant city planner. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Okay?
Yes?
Can you see my? Okay, perfect. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me okay, sorry?
It's cutting out a little bit, Bruce.
Okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and start the thanks very much. I appreciate everything you come out. That's a really high, and please, if you feel free to me. I would say questions.
Bruce, it's really cutting out. You're cutting off about every other word. So I don't know if it's your microphone or what you're doing, but you're cutting out about every other word.
Okay, is it better for you this way?
Yes, much better.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to grab my map so very important. Perfect. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to get started here. So I did the document meetings, everybody has this information at the time, the way to make sure for everybody can tell the more, and I'll provide today also some numbers for the line with inside your jurisdiction.
Bruce,
Okay,
still cutting out. Bruce, you're still cutting out pretty bad. You're good for a little bit, and then you're cutting out.
Okay, let me turn.
That's, it's not on our end, Bruce.
Okay, is that better or?
Let's
I
talk.
don't know.
I'll interrupt you if I need to, but go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to take I take out on what we call as lead for knowledge, so we'll talk to and then good for solutions that we can help from Ronald, the address, and then go around helping with compliance, so enforcing a registration if you have that, if you go down the route, ordinance, how do you supplement and enforce that, and I'll go through that process as well. I'll just give you a high-level quick overview of who we are. So we started about 5 years ago on the West Coast. And we first started, it was really, there wasn't any platforms or software that was out there to address short-term rentals. So what I mean by addressing short-term rentals is being able to identify the actual host or the address that's online. And then ongoingly monitor the short-term rentals to help enforce ordinances. And we were acquired by Grandkids a little bit, about 9 months ago, so we were fully integrated with Grandkids. So Grandkids is probably one of the largest digital platforms for state level government. If you flash forward where we are today, we're up to, it says 350, we're about 355 cities and counties and towns we work with throughout the U.S. When we first started, we mainly worked with larger cities such as LA, Denver, Chicago, and Boston. Had more complex problems related to short-term rentals. We've really grown over the last 4 years, so mainly medium and small sized cities and towns, so places like yourself. We help out the public experts, people like yourself, who are doing the short-term rentals on a local basis. Here's just kind of a overview for who we're working with currently up in the northeast, sorry. And so next I'm going to, before I show you the numbers that I pulled last week, I'm going to show you August and September, so you can kind of see a little bit of a trend here. But I'll talk about how we actually go out and identify those listings. So we currently scan about 99% of the short-term vacation rental platform market out there. So we're currently scanning about 65 websites, so everything from Craigslist up to Airbnb, including
Bruce?
Yes.
Do you mind just slowing down a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So we scan 65 platforms, with short-term vacation rental platforms across the U.S. And Canada as well. And we have a good mix of everything from Craigslist to Airbnb, international sites as well. Airbnb is still the largest vacation rental platform that's out there. They started this about 10 years ago. Everything online has kind of exploded over the last 10 years. VRBO and Headway are currently were bought by Expedia about 5 years ago, Expedia Group, and they're currently merging into a single platform, so it's going to go under the VRBO platform. So in other ways, we want to wait by the next 30 days or so. And then Tripping was bought by TripAdvisor, and they're going to merge as well. So we continuously look, and if we see other platforms that are relevant in these other jurisdictions, we'll just add to what we're scanning, but we capture about 99% of the market currently. So I'll just give you an insight into what we pulled, and this was kind of what was live online as of August. And I'll explain the numbers so it kind of makes sense because some of it is our language. The number 64 says unique rental units. That's going to be the actual physical house or dwelling itself. As of August, there were 60 rental units online inside your jurisdiction. The number 74, which is the listings, that's going to be the number of advertised sites. So, for example, Airbnb, HomeAway, and VRBO. So you'll typically see a little bit difference in those numbers. A lot of times the host is going to have our house on multiple sites at the same time. And then we have our house listed on Airbnb and then HomeAway as well. And you'll see that kind of difference in those two numbers. So this is what we actually last week, just kind of give you a little bit of an update. So this is both as of September 28th. So a little bit of an increase, not a huge increase, but a little bit of an increase. So currently there are 64 houses online rental units currently live, and then 76 listings, which are the advertised sites. So I'll take a break for a second and see if there's any questions.
No, Bruce, no questions.
Okay, so I'll give some data behind what we pulled. So we actually pulled as of the 20th of September. So that number on the top is 166 per night, the median nightly rate, which is what we call the average nightly rate. And then if you look below that to the right, you see kind of a breakdown of the unit types. And this is typically associated with what they say to be owner-occupied or host-occupied, and then non-owner-occupied or non-host occupied. So 93% of the house, 93% of the houses that were currently online as of September 28th were renting out their entire homes, which we consider kind of non-owner-occupied. So they're renting out their entire house. Now this could be somebody who's bought a second home, maybe it's a vacation home, they're renting it out. Maybe all season or during special events. So typically associated with somebody who's not living on site. 7% were partial homes, and that's typical with the owner living on site where they're renting out maybe a room or two, typically kind of, offset their mortgage or offset their taxes or maybe for, extra cash for home improvements. And then if you look to the bottom left, listing types, it kind of breaks down the actual physical house itself or what's online. So 57% were single family homes. And then 39% were multi-family homes. That little blue section where it says 4% unknown home type, that's going to be anything that's not a traditional dwelling. It could be anything from a boathouse to an RV, maybe a cabin in someone's backyard, maybe accessory to a dwelling, anything that's not a traditional dwelling. So next I'll just show you the growth. Like I mentioned, we did start a little bit over 4 years ago. Our first year we had pretty significant growth in customers. So we kind of have the hindsight to look back and doing scans on a monthly basis of all the municipalities across the U.S. So we can look at trends and see growth kind of in the local municipalities from the U.S. This is just showing kind of a time and date stamp. So as of last August, about the same date we did this scan, you got close to about 50 rental units or homes online. You're a little bit over 62 right now, so about a 22% growth from the same time frame of last year. The average that we see is anywhere from 15 to 20%, kind of on a nationwide basis, so kind of an average, so we're kind of right within that average. But as we know, short-term rentals definitely are not going away, and we definitely see them increasing on an annual basis. Next, I'll just talk about kind of what we see from an enforcement perspective. So we do quite a bit of surveys, at least every quarter, to get feedback from our customers to find out what's going on at the local level when it comes to short-term rentals. And this is the last survey we did on enforcement, kind of find out feedback on what percentage of the hosts were actually voluntarily kind of going out on their own to get registered, or maybe if it's in the case of a business license, and also paying their fair share of taxes. And this is pre-using host compliance. So what did they see before they started working with us? And the feedback we got was about 10% or less of those hosts were going out on their own and actually getting registered or obtaining their business license. So we asked a couple of follow-up questions to get a little bit of feedback. We did think that number was pretty low. And, we got a couple of feedback, a couple of points we got back were, first, if, you can't identify that host or that address, it makes it difficult to communicate with them. So to communicate with them about the registration process or obtaining their business license. Number two was kind of the ease of use. So was it easy for the host to actually get registered or obtain a business license? So was this maybe online versus paper? So did the host maybe have to go down to the clerk's office and fill out paperwork, or is this something they can maybe do from online where they can do it from anywhere? And then third was, just some of the hosts are just not going to play by the rules in the shared economy. And so that's where the kind of that cat and mouse game comes in, where code enforcement has to identify those hosts, kind of chase them online and go through that enforcement process, getting them to register. So I'll go into our software now, and I'll take a quick break to see if there's any questions so far.
Keep going.
Is there any questions? I'm sorry, it looks like they're on mute.
Not at this time. I don't know if you heard it.
No, sir, keep going.
Perfect, okay, perfect. Perfect. So I'll talk a little bit about our software and how we can help. So our software is software as a service, so it's completely cloud-based. So we don't have to work with IT or require IT to get it up and running. It's very simple and pretty quick to get up and running. It just would require a username and password, so kind of how we signed in today. And then we license it for the whole city, county, or town. So we don't license it per user or per seat. So all departments would have access to our software inside your jurisdiction. And then we have 5 different modules. And the reason we broke our software up into 5 different modules is we understand everybody's a little bit different when it comes to short-term rentals and have different needs and requirements. And so we don't require that you buy our platform up front. We try to make it really simple. So we basically set up our software as almost a la carte. So you can kind of choose what's important today or what you need today, what you need to address today. And if you have future ordinance changes down the road or have future needs or resources down the road, you can simply add the other modules on as you need them. It's kind of how our software is built and set up, and try to make it easy as possible. I'll go into address identification first, which is kind of our core module, and walk you through the process of how we actually identify short-term rentals. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of what I showed you today on the map. We're going to go out, we're going to scan all the vacation rental platforms within inside your jurisdiction. And then next, we're going to scan public sites as well. We scan over 100 public sites. One example would be Zillow, which most people know. And then what we do is we work with your assessor office, and we would typically get a download from your assessor office, usually like an Excel spreadsheet of all the owner information. And we take all that data that we scanned out there in public data and your assessor offer data, and we run it through our software. And when we run it through our software, we use things like artificial intelligence to look at the pictures, big data to go through keywords, and we're able to come up with an address match. And before we give you kind of a final check mark that we positively ID'd an address, everything is human verified. So we have about 200 people, we call them cyber detectives, who once our software identifies an address and matches it up, they're going to go through and look at that process, those pictures, that data, and make sure that it does positively match up with your assessor data before we give you a final check mark with inside of our system. So after we've identified an address, what we're going to do is every 3 days, we're going to go out and we're going to take a full screen snapshot of that actual listing. So for example, this is just showing an Airbnb listing for Denver. We're doing that for a couple different reasons. So first off is when you log into our software and we've identified an address, you can click on that address and see in real time where that host is currently listed. So if they're maybe on Airbnb live today, or maybe they could be on multiple sites, you'll be able to see that. Second, we're building kind of what we call a digital trail. So by taking these snapshots every couple days, you can go back in time and document when that host is online renting their location. So you can go back, days, weeks, months, sometimes years. And when we take this snapshot every 3 days, we're doing it multiple times throughout that day. And this is kind of more of a California thing, but some of the hosts figured out when code enforcement was going online, and they were making their changes in the morning, and they knew that code enforcement was going in the afternoon and looking at the rental units online, so they were making their changes throughout the day. So by taking multiple snapshots throughout that day, 10 to 12 times a day, we're able to capture any type of changes that may happen within inside those listings that we've identified. So next, I'll show you what we call our dashboard. So if you decided to partner with us, we would build you a custom dashboard. And the idea behind it is for the team to log in and be able to see quickly what's going on within inside your jurisdiction. And so this dashboard is completely custom built around your ordinance, the data that's important to you. So when you first log in, that top number, it's a little bit high, it's probably California, but the top number is going to be typically the number of rental units or listings that are currently online within inside your jurisdiction. The number 84 below that will show the new number of rental units that have come on in the last 30 days. And that number 90.2% below that is going to show you the total amount that we positively ID'd and matched up with your assessor data. Below this, you can have different graphs and information based on maybe registrations or business license, so who's currently licensed, what percentage or what number are not licensed. You can see kind listing types like we talked about a few minutes ago, so maybe owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied. But if you really want to get granular on a specific address or host, each of those pins on that Google map represents a listing. So you can just click on that pin and it's going to open up a separate web page specific to that actual advertised listing. And the first thing you'll be able to see is the process we went through to identify it. So we'll show you exactly how we identified and matched up that listing with your sales data. Next, you'll be able to see where they're currently online, so where they're online right now is in real time. And then second, you'll be able to go back in time if you need to on any of the data that's inside that listing. You can also see things such as occupancy levels. So if you decide to have within your ordinance a limit on the number of rooms or house based on maybe sewer requirements or parking, you'll be able to document those occupancy levels. You can run specific reports on houses or listings that are exceeding your occupancy levels from an enforcement perspective. You can also see if this is maybe a renovated garage or attic that hasn't gone through maybe an inspection process or hasn't been certified for safety reasons, or if this may be a cabin that's in the backyard that's not actually part of that house. So you get pretty detailed information through our dashboard, and the idea behind it, like I said, just totally customize around your ordinance and what data is really important to your jurisdiction. From a reporting perspective, if you decide to partner with us, you'll have a dedicated customer success agent, which is essentially an engineer who works with our company, would be the main point of contact. That's the person that works directly with your jurisdiction. And they can go in and build reports for you. So typically most cities and counties and towns that work with us will have reports that are generated per department or sometimes personnel. And it's kind of hard to see here, but in that top left corner, each of those drop downs represent a specific report based on specific data that maybe a department's looking for. So they'll build this custom report for you, and it kind of runs on autopilot. So as we're collecting all this data, it's populating those reports. So you can log into our system at any time and just click on a report and then generate it based on the newest data that's inside of our system. So we try to make it really simple to capture that information and then get that data as easy as possible. Now, if you ever have to get a report from an enforcement perspective, we'll show you the process. You can print out all the information you need, such as how we positively identified the address and matched it up, signed declarations, affidavits, anything you would need from a legal perspective can be generated out of our system. So I'll take a break for a second. Is there any questions about our address identification and some of that data behind it? Does that make sense?
Please keep going.
Good questions, perfect. Our next module is called compliance monitoring. And the idea behind compliance monitoring is a way to communicate with the host directly to let them know about your ordinance or your registration process and what's the most effective way using best practices that we've learned from the 350 cities and counties and towns that we work with, the best way to get these hosts registered or their business licensed. So with compliance monitoring, what we're essentially doing is we're sending out letters on your behalf using your letterhead, so it looks like it's coming directly from Norwich. And as I mentioned before, the feedback we got from most of our customers before they started working with us, about 10% of those hosts actually were going out and getting registered. So typically that first letter, if you look to the left, is what most cities, counties, and towns, kind of before they started working with us, would send out, announcing their new ordinance, and maybe here's the process to get registered. So they go down to the clerk's office, and here's the paperwork you want to bring. And typically, like I mentioned, the rate of actual hosts coming down to the clerk's office and getting registered was around 10% or less based on the feedback we got. So what we do is we do a totally customized letter, kind of based in your language and some best practices that we've learned from other cities, counties, and counties. And what we'll do is we're going to send that first page, and we're going to have a second page attached. If you look to the right, that second page attached to the letter is going to be a full screen snapshot of that actual listing. And we kind of call that the gotcha page. So when the host reads the first letter and says there's, Norwich has a new ordinance, here's the process to get registered, and they flip to the second page, they say, here's my listing on Airbnb or home away where we're listed, here's a picture of my bedroom. It's probably in my best interest for me to go down and go through that registration process. Now, we do have chains of letters that we can send out, and they're all kind of based on best practices, and we would work with your team on those letters, so they're totally customized, and we won't send a letter out until it's been approved by your team. But typically, the first letter that we send out, I just showed you a minute ago, The average rate of actual hosts getting registered is about 68%. That's kind of the average across our customers. Then if that doesn't work, that first letter, we can send on a second letter with maybe stronger legal language, maybe it's certified mail. We get to the second and third letters where our typical registration rate or business license rate is about 80 percentile. So about 80% of the hosts go through that process. And before we actually send a live letter out, our letters are scanned into a PDF and uploaded into our system. So code enforcement, whoever handles the registrations, can log into our system and then see where each of those hosts or those addresses that we've identified, where they are within that registration or business license process. So for example, you can click on an address and see if they're not currently registered. The first letter was sent out on September 15th. Did that letter get them through the process of registering? If it didn't, when's the second letter going out? Maybe it's going out October 3rd. So you can kind of follow the trail from beginning to end to see that whole process that we're handling for you. The idea behind it is to try to make an easy process to communicate with the host and get them to actually go through that registration process, but also kind of take off the workload typically that is put on, the clerk's office, the business office, and that back-end administration. So that's our compliance monitoring. I'll take a break and see if there's any questions on the compliance monitoring.
Please continue.
The question's perfect. Next, I'll talk about our mobile-enabled registration. Our mobile-enabled registration, we started this probably about 3 years ago, and it was based on requests from our customers. So we have a lot of customers who are still doing kind of a paper-based registration process. And just the workload a lot of the time, especially during the high season for certain areas, from a resource perspective, is becoming a strain. So they asked us if this is something that we could provide and build. So with our mobile-enabled registration, what we're essentially doing is we're building from the ground up a customized registration portal for Norwich, for example. And we not only built it online, but we also built it smartphone enabled. So the idea behind it is to try to make it as easy as possible for that host to get registered. So they can register from any device really that's connecting to the internet. They can register from a computer, a laptop, an iPad, or, for example, an iPhone. And then everything on the back end is totally customized based on your process of, the registration for short-term rentals, or maybe it's a business license. So on the back end, what we're going to do is we're going to completely digitize your application, and we make it kind of a Q&A for that host. We try to make it really simple by asking questions to get them through that registration process. So for example, if there's documentation that is required, so obviously a driver's license and insurance, but maybe if you have an inspection report that's required, as they go through this registration online, they can literally use their smartphone and take pictures of those documents. So for example, if they are taking a picture of their insurance paperwork, it will automatically upload in our system as a PDF. So we try to make it as simple as possible for them to do this online. And as they're going through those questions, if they get their question they can't answer, they don't have the proper documentation, we'll go ahead and we'll lock it in on that, for example, question number 4, and give them a password and tell them in order to get to question number 5, they need to bring the appropriate documentation. So once they do come back with documentation and they've completed that whole application process, we'll typically send an email to the clerk's office or maybe your business administration office and let them know that a new application has been processed within our system, and please log in to approve or deny. As far as the payment perspective, we would set you up with Stripe, who's the largest online processor and the most secure processor, and we would set you directly up with them to process the payment. And the host typically pays a fee of 0.08%. And most of the fees we see are paid with e-check, so it's pretty simple. Usually typically a couple dollars to the host to go ahead and process that registration. And then all that money would go directly into your account, typically within 24 to 48 hours. So a typical ACH debit, like a typical credit card. So that's our mobile-enabled registration. I'll take a break for a second and see if there's any questions so far.
No, please continue.
No questions? Okay, perfect. I'll talk next about our hotline, and we started our hotline for about 4 years ago. And the feedback we got from most of our customers was providing a service that could handle calls from the neighborhood or community about short-term rentals and typically not to involve, the police department, the sheriff's department, and certainly code enforcement obviously does work 24 hours a day, especially the weekends. And so essentially what we do is we provide an 800 number directly for your jurisdiction, and then we also provide an online form. So we're giving the community kind of two options to report disturbances or problems with short-term rentals. They can go online and stay completely anonymous and file their complaint, and we'll log that for them and go through that whole process. Or they can call if they want to have kind of immediate. They can call us on our 800 line and talk to a live person. So I'll kind of walk through, typically probably about 80% of the calls we get are noise related. So I'll just keep the high level of kind of the flow of how this works. If a neighbor calls in step one and wants to file a complaint, says, the neighbors next door are being loud, it's late at night, here's the address. The first thing we do is we'd file that complaint and log that complaint inside of our system. And then we'd ask that complainant or neighbor if they're willing to document what's going on next door or if they want to stay anonymous. If the neighbor says, yes, I'm willing to document what's going on next door, we'll simply text them a link to their cell phone. And when they click on that link, it's going to open up access to their video camera and their audio. So they can maybe take a video of the noise that's going on next door and audio. Typically, we'll see if it's a parking incident, they can take a picture of the car or the license plate. And once they've done that, we'll automatically upload into our system all that documentation. Then in step three, we're going to call that host directly, or sometimes it may be a caretaker, depending where that host is located. And we'll let them know that a complaint's been filed against their renters and that we need them to resolve that issue. And we'll typically give them anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes to resolve that issue, depending on your ordinance. And typically we'll call them back every 15 minutes until they let us know that, yes, I've talked to the renters, they're quiet now. And once they've given us that feedback, we'll close that out inside of our system. We're going to go back to step one and call that neighbor or complainant who called in, let them know that we have talked with the host and they've talked to the renters, and they said that the problem's been resolved or it's quiet now. We just want to make sure that's the case. And if the neighbor says yes, we're going to go ahead and close this out inside of our system. So from a documentation perspective, you can see all this data, which is really good for trending what's going on with short-term rentals and then future ordinance improvements. So for example, at the top left here, you can see the number of calls you've had in the past 30 days. You can see a distribution by complaint type. So you can kind of see what trends are going on within your community. So are we getting a lot of calls about noise, or is it mainly parking issues, or maybe sanitation? So you can kind of understand what's going on from the short-term rentals inside your community. Then you can also see the number of complaints by address. So typically a lot of our customers, city council counties that we work with, have a 3-strike rule within their ordinance. So for example, if a host has 3 calls within a year for noise disturbances, you may have the right to maybe revoke their license, or sometimes it's fine-based, based on the number of occurrences. So this is a way to document all that information. So for example, when code enforcement comes in, for example, on Monday and logs into our system, they're going to be able to see what happened over the weekend. So they can actually click on an incident, listen to the original recording from the actual neighbor who called in, see all that documentation that's been gathered behind it, and then see how long it took to get resolved. And then they can see if this unit may be a repeat offender. So is this maybe the same host that we've had calls on every other weekend about noise disturbances, and now we should go down and talk to him, and here's the kind of data behind it to have that discussion. So that's our hotline, our 24/7 hotline. I'll take a break here and see if there's any questions on the hotline, or any questions in general.
Not at this time. Please move forward.
No questions? Okay, perfect. I'll go into our pricing next, how our pricing model works. Let me go to here next. So with our address identification, it is based on the number of listings that you currently have within inside your jurisdiction. So if we decide to partner together, it'd be on the number that we actually looked at the last time that we worked together. It's going to be $45 per listing per year, done on an annual basis. So I'm going to go back and show you currently what we had for August, which was 76 listings. And I'll explain why address identification is based on listings. For us to go through the process of scanning the website, once we've gone through that whole process, then we know who that host or that address is. And then we can look for duplicates if they're on other sites. But we have to initially go through that process to identify them. And so that's why we priced out our address identification based on the number of listings. So let me go back here and get back to the pricing to show you what it looks like kind of an annual basis, and I'll walk you through this. So our address identification is $45 per listing per year. Then our compliance monitoring would be $22.50, and that's going to be based on the number of homes or addresses that are currently online, so not listings because we've already identified who that host is. And then our hotline is based on the number of houses or addresses as well, because we know who that host is. It's $12 per year. So let me show you what it looks like from an annual basis so that makes sense. So this would be the annual cost. The annual cost would be, for our address identification, would be $33.30 per year. Our compliance monitoring is $13.73 per year, and then our hotline is $7.32 per year. So this is all done in a 12-month annual basis. And for any reason, if your number of listings or your houses go up during any time period during the 12 months, we're not going to charge you for those additional listings or additional rental houses. We lock it in for 12 months. It would just be too difficult to do this on a monthly basis. It wouldn't make sense for us on a billing perspective. And we know that most cities have predictable budgets that they have to go by. So everything is locked in within a year, regardless of changes or any ups or downs inside within your jurisdiction. So I'll take a break for a second to see if there's any questions. It's pretty much what I had today. I wanted to kind of keep it at a high level, but informational on kind of how we can help with Norwich. And I'll take a break here to see if there's any questions.
Please keep going.
Okay. I appreciate everybody's time today. I know time's valuable. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and present. And if there's any questions down the road, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And from a staff standpoint, a couple things that I wanted to bring up that I was thinking about while I was sitting there was one of the reasons that this came up as an issue is we do get quite a bit of complaints about the short-term rentals that we do have in the city and concern about more, concern about the impact in neighborhoods that people may buy multiple, properties on the same road or close to each other, so we end up having short-term rentals stacked together with different people changing all the time, how that impacts the actual makeup of that neighborhood, the safety of the neighborhood, and people not knowing when they're buying into an area of the city that there may be a lot of short-term rentals there and they won't have that consistency of the neighborhood. They are wonderful. A lot of people really like them. It's a great option for people to stay at, so it's not a negative thing. I think everyone likes selection. Some people like to stay at the hotels. Someone wants to stay at something more cozy. So they are a great option for people. There's also, concern, for the hotels that, they do pay their taxes in the city. They have commercial businesses. These are unknown in the city right now. We know a number. We don't know where they're at. They won't provide us that information at this time because we're just in the demonstration mode with this particular company. But again, do we look at these as commercial ventures that are people buying these and investing? It's a wonderful thing that they're investing in the city and that they're making these homes attractive and hopefully not just interior-wise, but exterior-wise. So it does benefit us in that way. However, again, neighbors are concerned. We get calls from neighbors and say there's lots of cars next door. It changes all the time. Some of the things that we've looked at for the mayor and talked about, how would we in Norwich look at regulating these if you wanted us to move forward with an ordinance is looking where our transportation corridors are, basing it as a transportation-oriented development, so that we say maybe within a half a mile of where our public transportation, our bus lines are, would be great places for these, so that people can, take our transportation and not be scattered too far, but be in the corridors where our businesses are and there's goods and services available to people who are staying and visiting. We've looked at areas where there's quite a bit of large homes. We might want to permit those, because we know that those buildings are very expensive to upkeep and take care, and maybe those people that own those need that extra income to maintain them. We've also discussed multifamilies and how that would impact if somebody had a 4-family and wanted to do 4 separate units in that. How would that be with people coming and going from 4 separate units? And would we control on a multifamily, if there was 4, do we say no more than half of them could be, rental units for short-term rental? So there's so many things we're bouncing around. And one of the reasons we're here tonight is, this has come up for complaints, and Rich Shook is here from zoning if you have any zoning questions. But we really need some guidance from you, how you want us to proceed, or if you don't even want us to proceed. I mean, we're here to work for you and for the community.
Alderwoman Gould.
So what ordinances do we have on the books right now, if any, that regulate these short-term rentals?
We don't have any ordinances or regulations directly addressing short-term rentals, other than special permit process for bed and breakfast. And that's a whole other process, and they're owner-occupied properties. What we tend to find with a lot of the short-term rentals is the properties people have purchased, which are not owner-occupied, and by definition, the way they're using them, they're actually a hotel use. So, with that said, what they're doing is they're actually circumventing all of the safety rules that would be in place for a hotel, or the safety rules that would be in place for a permitted bed and breakfast. So there's the public safety aspect of it from one perspective, then there's the neighborhood aspect, and it's very difficult to enforce. I have been able to convince some property owners to sell the properties because it didn't work out for them as short-term rentals.
Just want to add that one of the things that we're hearing from, we spoke with host compliance, is most of the communities that they work with do not allow any special events at short-term rentals. So there's no parties at them, you can't have a wedding there, you can't have anything like that. They are like a hotel room. You just go and you stay there and you go from there. But and if you want to be with your, wherever by yourself or with your guests, but no events there. And that's pretty across the board. So if someone decided that, if the community, which is the council on their behalf, decided to have an ordinance regarding short-term rentals, we would probably think of some kind of pathway for certain properties if they wanted to get allowance to also be an event venue, but it wouldn't fall under the registration for a short-term rental. So they would be like a short-term rental plus they got whatever the procedure would be, like a special permit for an event venue, just, or something like that. So that would always be kind of separate. So at some point that they were really always having problems with compliance with overnights or something, because again, number of complaints could trigger not getting a license the next year. They potentially could still be an event venue, but not be a place that people could stay. So we want to be able to potentially have those options, but it would not be allowed to be both. With just being a short-term rental would not guarantee that you could have events there. Do you have a question? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You still on the floor, Stacy?
Okay, I just want to ask one more question, or maybe it's more of a statement. I mean, considering the fact that we have 60 of these unique listings, or maybe there's 74 with 60 unique listings, I think we need to get on this sooner rather than later. And does Granicus work with the city to help develop ordinances?
Yes.
Based on other communities and what other communities have done and have been successful?
Absolutely, and that's one of their first things that we spoke about, is that's what they actually sent us, I think even a draft ordinance to kind of look at, very generic, but it would be based on what each community wants. Again, if we decided to be unique in the sense that we decided to have all of our short-term rentals within a half mile of our transportation corridor, that's really different. And so we would tell them where that is with that, so when they're doing their searches, they talked about searching the internet and doing that, they would know, okay, or do they fall even within that area that would be allowed, or are they so far out of that transportation corridor that they would not even be permitted, they would not be able to get a short-term rental. So they're gonna follow whatever we decide, but they do have the ability to work with us, yes, on ordinances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman DeLucia? Question?
No, actually.
Oh, okay.
No.
I'm sorry.
I
I'm sorry.
think they're all-
Pro Tem Mark Betancourt, please.
Thanks. A couple things. So when you brought up the subject of the bed and breakfast, so I think if we were going to do something like this as far as regulation of short-term rentals, wouldn't it be a good idea to revisit the whole bed and breakfast situation and then enroll the whole thing into one piece?
No, I would say no. That my opinion would be no, because we have a really good procedure in place for bed and breakfast.
Well, my only question is, are we going to have two different standards? That's
Well,
what
they
I'm
sort of
concerned
are,
about.
because a bed and breakfast goes through the commission on the city plan, you have to live there. There's regulations that say you have to live on the site, you have to
Okay.
provide that meal. So that's different from short-term rentals, because it's their home. They have to be the owner of the property living there, or a caretaker living there taking care of it. So it's very different, so I would not put it into the same term as a short-term rental at
Okay,
all.
no, that makes some sense.
And I think that the process we have for that works really well if people follow that route.
The other thing, as far as designing a program, personally, and I'm going to agree with what Stacy said, that we should be on this sooner rather than later, but the fact of the matter is we also have to pay for it, and, I like these things to be revenue neutral if at all possible, so
we had that conversation with them,
and we have limits to what we can charge in Connecticut. It makes it a little more difficult, I think, for us.
You can't quote me on these numbers, but based on that numbers and figuring it out, the mathematics came out to, I think, about $250 or something like that. $250 for the licensing of a short-term rental. Let's just say that for each unit. That is a wash. That's a wash. And what they're showing us is right now the average is $166 a night. So if you have a short-term rental paying your $250 or $500, if it's revenue, they're still making money. That's not a killer. That's not going to break anyone's bank to pay their licensing fee if they're making that kind of money. And one of the things that we can do with the ordinance as well is, it's very hard to enforce, I believe, but you can set a limit of numbers of how many times you can be a short-term rental. And because of the fact that, do you want someone different, every day of the year at that property, or is it, there's a gap between the times of when they can come to impact the neighborhood. And that's what the concern is, the people that are living there year-round, that's their home, and to have these come up and change. It changes the neighborhood. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's an exciting thing. It can be great. You can have fresh new people coming in and out, but it also is different. And different is not always supposed to.
Without hiccups, let's just say.
There is, but the neutral thing, like I said, I love the fact that we could charge I think a fairly reasonable amount of money if you're getting an average of $166 a night, if based on their numbers. I think a reasonable amount of money to cover that licensing fee and have it a wash. The compliance of 24/7, having someone be able to respond is really important to get those noise levels down and to handle those things. So the police aren't chasing these kind of things all the time. Of course, people can still call the police, but at least they know they could even refer to, hey, there's an 800 number for the short-term rentals because they're licensed, they're a short-term rental. I mean, it's everybody working together and getting the owners know that they only have responsible people that they're renting to as well. It kind of keeps it, they're getting those people who are problematic people, they won't rent to them anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes,
I do.
Representative Miles.
Just a couple questions. So what constitutes a short-term rental by their definition?
So what constitutes a short-term rental? You're not living there. You're renting the space out to someone else who's staying there for a short duration of time. So it's not like you have a lease for a long period of time. You're not staying there for 6 months or a year, like a normal tenant would be. So you don't have that tenant contract usually. You usually are booking them through, you're usually booking them through some kind of website agency. So there is a way that you're advertising, you have potentially a room for rent. Sometimes there's a room for rent in your home. Most of the time, we're finding that's not the case. Here in Norwich, the case is you're renting the whole property, the whole house. So the short-term rental is just the duration of time, and it's usually a lot short. It's not the same as being kind of like staying in a hotel. A couple nights, maybe a couple weeks you might stay there, but it's not those long-term renters. So you have a lease, they have new utilities turned in, none of that happens. These are people coming and going.
Because I know like with Rhode Island, especially, they have your winter rentals, you have your summer rentals, you have your academic year only rentals. So that's my question. Would those sorts of things fall under this or no?
We could have that discussion. The discussion would have to happen. So maybe that's week-long rentals, probably a short-term, that's a short-term rental, you know. The nightly rentals is definitely a short-term rental. When someone's staying for like a semester in school, that's kind of a longer period of time. They probably have a lease. They probably have, maybe potentially put utilities in the name. These are, none of that is happening. The furniture is there, everything is set up. You're not bringing anything to move in normally. It's set up for you. It's like staying in a hotel in that way. It's just another option for people to have. And which it's like, again, there's no problem with having options. It's how we stack them in the city where we want them to go. And so we don't severely impact neighborhoods that don't come back, or that somebody purchases so many of them that we lose that housing stock to other people looking for houses too. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that we don't have people who are not living here owning so much of the housing stock that then people wanting to live here don't have.
Yeah, and that, I can tell you that's a huge problem in Rhode Island for folks that are looking for long-term rentals, and everything's seasonal or it's winter only. So there's that short-term, that's what they use for short-term rentals in Rhode Island, and it does create a huge housing issue there. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Typically, wouldn't it be defined as something less than 30 days, or am I wrong there?
I mean, we could set the limitation of what a short-term rental is. I don't think we got so far into the weeds yet on that of what a short-term rental. But some people may stay longer if they say that, I'm just throwing something out there. You're an electric boat. You're on a contract. You need to be someplace for a couple months. You don't want to move here with all your furniture. You might do a short-term rental for longer than that. But
I just say that I know there's some things in housing law as to what establishes a person's residency and stuff, and I don't want to, run into those problems.
that's great points, and we'd have to look into that.
Okay, couple things quick. I'm curious if someone can tell us what the occupancy rate is per week of these short-term rentals in Norwich. If there's a way to collect that data, I think that's important. They're operating outside the scope of any review. Our hotel industry is subject to the governor's executive orders, and they've taken a huge hit. These individual sites are just operating, period. Nobody is reviewing anything. Richard talked about the fire code issues and other building code issues. Nobody knows if people are staying in a safe accommodations, so I'm concerned about that. I also look at this, though, as an opportunity, because I look at a lot of the upper floors in downtown, and we could structure to encourage a short-term rental in the downtown area, and perhaps encourage the investors who own these buildings to invest knowing they have a higher return, and thus create a destination in the downtown itself and support the businesses down there. That's one concept. But this whole discussion was just to get the ball rolling, get everyone looking at it, because they're here. My office has received the same complaints his office has over the years in certain neighborhoods. I'm not going to name them. I can tell you there are people looking at buying much larger properties in the city right now, up in the Norwich Town area and other areas in that direction, that if what happens in some of the properties in the downtown area, even around NFA, if that starts happening in those hills, your phone's going to be ringing off the hook, because the road patterns don't work for that kind of business. And people buy a home to live in their neighborhood and have an expectation that it's going to be residential. And if you start allowing commercial, unabated, to operate in residential neighborhoods, we're going to have a serious problem. And so that's why I asked that we have this discussion, and we'll have more. I appreciate the effort your department is making on this. And we're almost out of time. Yes, Wilson.
Just one thing, is there any way possible you could reach out to the gentleman to get a that presentation? To get that presentation for us to kind of visually look at?
I think he did. I'm sorry, he sent it to you. It didn't get handed out to you. I'm sorry that it was sent. I did send it to the mayor's office, so we'll make sure that you get a copy of that presentation for sure. And we're actually going to get this video on his end recording. We're going to ask for it and see if he'll send it to us so we can put the whole thing so everyone can hear it on our city's website. So
Thank you.
I thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach me in the planning department, Rich Shook, and Dan Dennis go well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you staying this late, everyone. No.
You open yours before we Hold on a second. Was it linked? We're not going to be sealed? Because you were with gloves.
I don't know.